Okay, Greg, we are live.
Awesome.
And I am sharing the link onto Discord now. So what do we wanna vamp about for a second? What are we thinking while people file in?
Well, that's a fine question. I guess I could just introduce myself. We could say what we are going to be covering this week. I don't know. There are a bunch of things we can talk about.
Um, well, let's talk about what we'll cover this week because then you'll be able to introduce yourself once people are here.
Sure.
Um, assuming there's more than just Victoria. Hey, Vic is here. And yeah, so we'll be covering 2.7 and 2.8 from Insinuation, the second arc of Worm. Oh, here we go. We got 2 plus 4 times 5 as well.
Why, hello.
Okay, let's see here. Yeah, these are the chapters where Taylor kind of talks to the Undersiders a bit more after agreeing to join them. Wow, who's that hot lady on the lunchbox?
Yeah, the swanky outfit.
So, okay, I don't know that we need to wait any longer for people. If you would introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, my name is Greg, also known as Sigma Jargon. I'm a longtime friend of Cancelled here. Just joining him this week
Oh,
to talk a
it's
bit
fine
about
to
Worm.
it's fine to just call me William. That's not a problem.
Oh, sure.
Um,
We're full docs on this channel.
yeah, well, the thing is that the people who know me from Twitch aren't even here right now, so anyway, um so yeah, we've known each other for a long time. Greg is the first person who ever showed me Worm. It's he tried to get me to read it for ages, but I have like I have the standard amount of like kind of chafing at like reading a book that you don't know anything about kind of thing. But he just put it on during one of the road trips we took on the audiobook, and I was, immediately in. I loved it, of course, but
Yeah, asking people to read Worm it's a bit of a lift just because it is so long. It's what, 1.5 million words, whatever it is.
Also, I
Which
think
is
for a long time I didn't know about the audiobook, and like I have reading issues, let's say, with my eyeballs. So,
yeah, I think when I first recommended it to you, the audiobook didn't exist yet.
yeah. Um
So we have a lot to thank Rain for in terms of bringing this to a wider audience so that people can experience Worm without having to necessarily use their eyeballs to go over every word.
Indeed, indeed. So Vic says, Greg, do you feel smug that you were the one who introduced it? I always feel smug about that stuff, like Remy Wolf. And yeah, I mean, you should feel smug about introducing Remy Wolf. Like, I get it.
I don't think smug is the right word. I'm definitely very gratified that William eventually did end up trying it out and enjoying it so much. And I really hope that other people have a similar experience where they can get into the story and find that they really resonated with it in many ways.
Gratified is good. Vic says that you're kinder. Oh boy, do you? You have the chat open, right?
I do, yeah.
Okay, cool, cool. I'll probably say a lot of this stuff just for our audio only people anyway. But let's
Oh,
see.
but then they're missing this sweet art done by Victoria.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that even the people who are only listening to the audio can probably turn on the screen for a second to look at the two different art pieces at the beginning and the middle.
Mm.
I'm not worried about that. I think that people will see the art. Let's see here. So do we want to jump into 2.7?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool, cool, cool. So, the Undersiders cheer because Taylor joins their group. It's just how we start off the moment after she agrees. and they sort of let her know that she needs to come in civilian clothing because otherwise it'll be really obvious where their hideout is if like a clearly costumed individual goes in. Uh,
Yeah, or just wandering around as a group and there's one person in costume will raise suspicions. But
mm,
Taylor, she really freaks out about this a bit because she didn't think it through. We're barely into the story and she's already sort of established a pattern with this, where she thinks in the moment, gets herself into a situation, and then hasn't really thought of a plan to get herself back out again.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, she thinks about like her lack of sleep and everything, but it like regardless of how she got here, it's a distinct pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's see here. Uh, so they're going to check out the loft that the Undersiders live in. Taylor's going to need to meet Rachel, which is, going to cause some friction because Rachel didn't want her in the group, etc. Um, it's clear that she'll be hostile based on what the others have said in the previous chapters. There's there's the moment when Taylor has to change, and she just has the other Undersiders go to the like alley below, and she changes on the roof. She's got like extra clothes on below, even the costume, because essentially, if she just had the costume on, she'd be freezing. Um,
Yeah, it just occurred to me that, especially for villains, changing out of your costume has to be a thing that you do fairly frequently. Like, you do a big job, you pull off a heist, or you beat somebody up, then you have to, as part of your escape, go back into your civilian identity or travel so far away that you escape any pursuit. But
yeah,
changing back is an easy way to avoid trouble if you can do it without being observed.
right, right. And I mean, the thing is, we'll see throughout the story like a bunch of times where like one way or the other, like getting into or out of costume is like an actual like important plot point.
Hmm.
Where like either they'll need to get back to their civilian life suddenly, or they'll need to like um find a way to exit a situation where people already know them, stuff like that. So,
Hmm.
yeah, the book does definitely think about that and consider it in given situations. It's like an easy snag to throw in of like, you know, an obstacle, I guess. Um, and different characters have different amounts that they care about it because, like, I don't know. Like, if you're seen with Rachel in public too much, then people will be like, this person, known associate of bitch or hellhound.
Yeah, that's probably another reason why they didn't bring her along here, besides just the aggression, is because they are in their civilian identities, and hanging out with Rachel would tie them to her.
Yeah, yeah. Um, poor Rachel. Yeah, yeah. She's a pariah among society. Um, always unincluded. It's true, Vic. It's true. Um, let's see here. She puts the all the she takes off everything but the mask, and she puts all her armor and all the other costume sections into her backpack, which she also puts the lunchbox into, as you can see on the art there. um let's see here. 2 plus 4 times 5 says, I love Taylor's inner thoughts in the roof scene, being self conscious about her appearance and then realizing, wait, no, I'm the girl that put Long in the hospital. I'm kind of a badass. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, Greg was actually about to get to that in his little section here. I was just going to say there's kind of massive social anxiety, and uh, she mentally compliments them a lot. Uh, and as
Yeah,
Vic says, the plain to pretty and nerd to plain scales. Vic was upset with even that framing. I thought that was funny.
yeah, but Taylor describes them as they were cool, confident, assured people. I was me. She really looks at the Undersiders in this moment and says, wow, these are people who have it together. And she's really sort of looking up to that in this moment, since she feels that she's so low on that sort of totem pole where she does not have it together. She is not cool, confident, and assured, but she, at least in the moment, is able to armor herself up like 2 plus 4 times 5 says, and think, yeah, I'm a badass. I kicked some ass. Maybe I can stand with these people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for sure. And it's like the kind of subconscious. Maybe I could. Well, it's the conscious. Maybe I could be on their level, and the subconscious. Maybe I could be one of them. um, I think. Um, let's see here. So Vic is saying that they think it's offensive to call someone plain, even as a reference point. If someone called me plain, dot 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 dot. Um, no one would call you plain, Vic. No one would do it. They wouldn't dare. Um, Taylor changes her mindset with that and sort of forces herself to be her cape self. She reminds herself that she's going undercover. Um, well, yeah. And she sort of boosts her own confidence by telling her that, like, now she's one of them. She's on their team, and, like, they want her to be on the team. Um, so she goes down the fire escape and like awkwardly takes off the mask and has to put on her glasses. I just always imagine this like takes a few seconds and she has to like get her hair right afterward. It's very silly moment really. Um
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those moments that sort of has that visual component to it, though. You can imagine like taking the mask off, glasses on, you sweep the hair back.
yeah, I mean it could
Um,
be done cool. Maybe she just thinks she looks like a loser and she actually looks like a badass, but
like, yeah, definitely. There's so many very cool interpretations of that sort of exact moment that Taylor doesn't think of as cool.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Victoria's right. Regent rolls his eyes, I think, exactly for that sort of point where it's sort of a thing you see in fiction where people like taking off the mask and then pushing their hair back.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's true.
But
Oh,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh no, you say whatever you're going to say.
Yeah, I was gonna say, in this moment, then she introduces herself and she uses her real name because she says to herself, this will avoid any trouble if they do any digging on me or if you run into people who I know together with them, which is a good point, but also exposes her way more to this group that she plans to betray at some time in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Um, for sure. Like she just kind of sinks herself deeper and deeper in terms of like making it a higher and higher stakes thing. Um, in terms of
Yeah,
like her undercover plan.
if you're gonna jump in the deep end, you just gotta swim straight down.
Yeah. And to what Vic had just said in the last couple comments about Regent rolling his eyes, as well as the Brian when she does that move and then just smile. Um, they kind of sprinkle in a lot of character beats throughout this to continue reinforcing what the characters are like. Um, I feel like they convey a lot in a short amount of time, and they keep like reinforcing it throughout the story. So all the characters, to me, feel really well fleshed out because you kind of know what they would do without having to have seen them in a situation first after you like get to know them.
Yeah, we get to see a little bit of everyone. Not quite so much of Alec, but the moment I really liked in here is that Lisa gives Taylor a hug, and Taylor is a bit thrown off by this. She says that she's been needing a hug from someone who wasn't her dad for a long time, and oh, Taylor, don't
Oh,
get too
Taylor.
attached, Taylor.
Oh no. Um, I needed this hug so I could betray you. Uh, so they walk further into the sort of actual really low end areas in the docks because even though Taylor lives in the docks, it's like there's still a spectrum of like sort of more normal neighborhood to like really poor, and they end up in an area that has just no like city services, basically.
Sure. I mean, Taylor might live in a concrete hovel, but at least she doesn't live in a disaster area.
Yeah. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, there was in fact a little bit. Taylor describes the city as what it might look like if war or disaster forced people to abandon it for a few years. And while perhaps true, I think this is just like normal urban decay, or perhaps a bit accelerated from the fact that a lot of the businesses moved away. It can get so much worse than this, Taylor, and I think we'll see some of that throughout the story.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Taylor sees both the kind of unhoused people that she expects to see, and other unhoused people that she describes, or oh, I guess you don't know. We don't know that these other people are unhoused, but she sees other people around and active who she describes as surprisingly normal. Um, so she's sort of like acclimating. She's never been in this exact kind of environment before. It's like we talked about on previous weeks. She kind of gets more sympathetic to a wider variety of people as time passes, and like she is exposed to just, um,
Yeah,
more
that's
life.
fair. She sort of just glosses over a bunch of people here, where she's like, "Oh yeah, shirtless man with beard down to his navel, bagged woman, artist on the corner." Like she sees these people, but doesn't really give them any attention or thought.
Yeah, yeah. But I think even just the sort of introspection about the fact that it's different from what she expected is already like a first, um, I don't know, just like the starting point, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, but let's see here. They get to sort of an unassuming red brick building, and it's got like a sliding metal door, and they go in through a different not sliding metal door. The lower floor seems like a just completely abandoned building with old equipment, and Taylor like sort of lets down the walls on her senses and feels like a bunch of bugs throughout, so she knows that it's been undisturbed for a long time because of their like the way they're scattered throughout. But then they get to the second floor, and bam.
Yeah, welcome to the loft. It's a pretty sweet secret little base up there. No adults allowed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's high ceilings, and there's an open floor plan. It's got a living room with nearly as much square footage as Taylor's like whole house. The main area of the loft is defined by like two couches that are set at a right angle to each other, with a coffee table in front, and then like a big screen TV that they're both facing. The place is fully decked out with like video games, cable, and a DVR. Tons of random stuff strewn around. Um,
Yeah, it's basically sort of what you'd imagine if you were your teenager self and you gave yourself a bunch of money to play around with. You'd have all the sweetest gadgets, you'd have a cool pad.
right, right, for sure. And Vic is saying, "I wish we spent more time in the loft." Prime fan fiction setup. I agree. There's like one thing about this story that is a little sad, but it's like just kind of the nature of it is because the status quo changes so much so often, then you don't get to spend a lot of time in any one place, which can feel a little sad because like a lot of people like when they sort of linger, like in Arc 15 and a few other places, you get sort of downtime compared to the rest of the story, and it feels like I don't know, it's pretty cool. So
Yeah, I think we spend the most time of the story in one location just in the docks in general, not the loft. But we do get to know this location, as in this area of Brockton Bay, fairly well.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, for sure. Um, and it hurts Vic's heart about these
Yeah,
locations.
missing the loft is definitely sad because it is a really cool location.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I heard somebody. Okay, so I was listening to a different worm YouTube thing. Um, the YouTube channel was Anecdotal Adventures, and just when they were talking about this section, they're young enough that they had never heard of a TiVo, so they thought it was like a futuristic piece of technology from the worm setting, when really it's so antiquated that like modern high schoolers are like, "What is this?" Um, yeah. And then Vic says, "If we consistently had one setting the entire story, I think the vibes would be totally different. A lot more YA fiction, which I always want instinctively." Yeah. Um. I mean, I kind of want that, but I am glad that the story does keep moving because I really I like the different sections of the story for like pretty different reasons and like tones, not just of like what's happening, but also sort of how the characters are. I don't know. I don't know. I like it because there's just so many different things, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah, you get to see a variety of settings.
I mean,
And there are
I
advantages to either way. Yeah.
yes, yes, for sure. Um I mean, it also Taylor has a lot of instability in her life and it kind of represents that too. But um
Yeah, that's fair. Rob was pretty good at representing the themes of the story in not just the words on the page, but the conflicts that happen and the settings that your characters go to, the relationships between characters. And so, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that that ends up blending very well with Taylor's actual inner struggles.
yeah, yeah. Um so Vic says, "I think it's a better representation of IRL life." Yeah, yeah. Most of the times, once you like leave a workplace, you kind of never go back, kind of thing, you know. Or like when you stop living at a place, you just you live in the new place now. It gone. Um, so. But there are 6 rooms in the back, just walls that stop about 8 feet up with no ceilings. So you know they're not 100% private, I guess, but they're like definitely a separate area. There's art on 3 of the doors. There is one that is a crown, one that is a woman's face with puckered lips, and one that is like a restroom, men's, women's sign. Um, and then yeah, it's like a mess there, but she doesn't really want to like mention that. She even feel it seems like she feels guilty for thinking it. Kind of.
Yeah. I mean, the exact thing that's said in the chapter is it was mess that made a statement. Like, this is our space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. There's a lot of cool flourishes here. I like Alex's art. Or Alex's art. It's hard to pronounce that with the apostrophe. Um, and they're actually pretty welcoming here. Taylor's remarks on it, how cool a space this is, and Alec calls her a dork, and Lisa has to clarify that this is your space now too, since Taylor is now a member of the team.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Vic says Taylor's idea of a mess cut off. I'm gonna have to deep clean this weekend. Well, that sounds just terrible. But
Yeah, Taylor sees a few pizza boxes and cans, and she's like, "Ah, oh, this place is so messy."
yeah, yeah. Probably one
Mm,
of those really relentless cleaners. Um,
I guess when you can feel everything via bugs, you become a bit more sensitive to mess.
yeah. And yeah, the interaction between Taylor and Alec is really good. She just um can't fit the way that he interacts and converses yet. Doesn't have any read on him, so has a really hard time dealing with him overall. And
To be
she,
fair, Victoria, uh, I think that part of that is because she's so used to getting statements that have at best hidden barbs, if not being outright mean via bullies, that she tends to interpret statements in a negative light.
Yeah, yeah. And 2 plus 4 times 5 says that's a really good point about bug powers leading to cleanliness. Yeah. Um. So, are we? So the rooms on each side of the contents of the rooms are Alex's room, a bathroom, Lisa's room, Rachel's room, the dog's room, and a storage room. So the Undersiders are going to clear out the storage room so that Taylor has a place to stay. Initially, she tries to decline and says she has a place already, but then she relents and agrees eventually. Um,
Yeah, they make a point of making some space for her, which is good because she won't bleed on all of their nice couches, but is also helps to cement her as part of the team, where she has they're making space for her.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and everybody there hates Shadow Stalker. We get a little story about how Shadow Stalker and Gru are kind of nemesis within the city. They or at least Shadow Stalker considers Gru her nemesis, which is the important bit because she's trying to murder him.
I
Um,
think if someone shoots you and you end up bleeding on a nice couch, you're going to end up with some less than pleasant feelings towards that person.
yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. Um, And I mean, everybody in there hates her, but like, I guess my point is, if Shadowstalker just left, then I think that Gru would be very happy with that. But if like Gru just left, Shadowstalker would be like, I didn't get to kill Gru.
Oh, I see. Yes,
Like that's
should
maybe
want
I'm
to
reading into
pursue.
things too much, but um, yeah,
I don't know. She might take that as a win if the other person flees.
maybe yeah. I don't know. Hard to say exactly.
I'm certain we'll see more of her in the future.
Yeah, Vic says I hate her too. Yep.
Yeah, like I said,
All
like
me and all
Devin
my
says,
homies.
everyone in this room. Yeah, everyone in this room hates Shadowstalker.
Yeah. And then Vic says, "No, I agree with you, William. The coward." Um. Uh. So Vic had finished arc 30, but has recently finished a few more chapters of the epilogue, not quite the whole thing, and so has like slightly more even perspective than before,
Mm.
which I think is funny. But Rachel isn't there right now, and Brian's always stressed out when Rachel isn't there, so that kind of
Yeah, so
comes up.
they settle down to wait. Brian tries to get Alec to move, but can't. So he sits down between Lisa and Taylor, who shifts around and tucks her leg under her, sort of moving away from people because she's just sort of not ready for that sort of contact, I guess, and also just nervous around Brian.
Oh, I mean, definitely. It's very clear that she doesn't know how to act around somebody that she's like attracted to. On top of all the other different ways the situation is like weird because of her like double think about being here for her for undercover purposes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Brian talks a bit about the details of how this operation works financially. So they get a $2,000 a month retainer just for being there, being ready to respond to situations, and being ready to take jobs. And the jobs get them an extra 10 through 45K per job, split 5 ways. That's that's some pretty good money. 2011, $2,000 a month by itself works out to about $12 an hour at a full time job, or in modern dollars, about $15 an hour at a full time job. Um, and then if they do even a single job a month at their average like job return, they would about triple that. So 45, $50 a month, 45 $50 an hour rather, at a full time job would be the equivalent, which is pretty good for high school students.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, I mean, the thing is that what Vic is saying too is plus free living and all that. Very nice. I would take that gig. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I get it.
Yeah,
Um,
it does come with some downsides, though. Notably, we just heard about Gru bleeding all over the couches, and it's a common enough thing they want the new member to have a room so she won't bleed all over the couches.
right.
That's,
Yeah.
you know, that's a downside to a job.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, but I don't know. There's a part of me that says that these people would be fighting for their lives as capes one way or another anyway.
Sure. If you're put in that perspective, yeah. If you're going to be putting yourself at risk no matter what, you may as well get some sweet moolah out of it.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's it's like interesting on multiple ends because it's not only like oh my god. I don't know why my phone insists on like silence the notifications and it's like no, you didn't want that. Um
Very important notification.
yeah, I mean it's for a server that I turn notifications off for anyway, so it's just baffling. And I don't.
Yeah, well then while you
Here we
handle that,
go. Sorry,
I'm gonna
there we are.
mention that that sounds like a lot of money. Like if you're paying a group of teenagers 2K each a month, plus maybe some kickbacks to have them take particular jobs, that's seems like a lot of money. But on the other hand, you're getting a gang of super powered people who can go and wreck shit up for not really that much a month. Maybe, 10 to 15K a month.
Hmm.
That's actually pretty cheap from the perspective of, from my perspective at least, being able to be like, you can employ some really scary people for not very much money at all because they're young, essentially.
Right, right. Yeah. Um, and I mean, they're young, and because because of the fact that there's this, sort of permanent net of the law out to get them. Once they're a criminal, like if you've done like one, I don't know, let's just say that you rob a convenience store when you're Gru and you're 15, then like permanently Gru is on the like villain side in the main public like idea, and so he is stuck in this like perpetual state of needing to be able to like hide. There's nowhere he can go in America where Gru will not be a wanted person for being a villain parahuman, is part of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it becomes hard to jump that fence back and go legit afterwards.
Yeah, there's not really a good method of rehabilitation because they have mostly maintained the standard legal systems that existed in 1982. And, they updated in some ways as time passed, but in the broad sense, they're still the same institutions.
I guess one of the things that we'll see later is that the new laws and institutions that have passed are actually pretty harsh on parahumans.
Mm-hmm. Well, but I
You
guess
can,
what I'm
you,
saying is that it's a system that was already harsh. I would argue, like, to a very cruel degree, and like the way it developed in real life has also been very like increasingly harsh since the time period split um, in
sure.
America, and
Goodness.
so like
Go
it
ahead.
becoming a harsher kind of system in the setting like kind of just tracks with reality.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Going to pull us back a little bit because 2 plus 4 times 5 had a good comment when they said they hope that the underserved get a dark red colored couch when they replace the white couch that Gru bled on. Yeah, definitely got to adjust your living style a bit when Gru bleeding on the couches becomes a regular occurrence. No more white couches.
Yeah, you definitely have to get
Also,
something like a blood-proof couch.
I have to just say, I'm very surprised that Bish doesn't let the dogs on the couch. I guess she's disciplined in that way.
Yeah, yeah. They're not supposed to be on the furniture, I don't think. I mean, I let my dog on the furniture cuz I'm a chump, but whatever. Um and then Vic says about the switch from like bad to good or villain to hero, however you want to frame it, is that with it's easier if you have a vaguer power like assault, where his power is easy to mask by just using it differently, whereas like Gru or Bug would have a very hard time doing that because it's like, oh, I control bugs differently than that other villain bug.
You
Um,
just got to control a bunch of butterflies instead. Then people won't notice, I'm certain.
right, exactly. Can't tell it's the same cape.
Yeah.
It's like for bitch. I mean, if she became good and became Hellhound, there's not really a way to like use the power so that you don't know who it is. Don't worry,
Yeah.
I'm the other one with the same exact power.
Yeah, it becomes harder to break that chain of people's memory where they see a person doing things. Whereas if you have something more generic like speed or strength or flight, your sort of traditional flying brick powers that
Right, or
those
just um
go on.
many of the things that have no physical or visual component where uh like anyone who you can't see directly what they're doing, they can probably pretend in some way that their power is different later.
That's true. Yeah, like Tattletale could easily
Yeah, yeah.
jump over because her power is purely internal.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, she could just pretend to be a different thinker in terms of what the public sees, and then like obviously they'd know internally, but what are you gonna do? Um, anyway, yes. So they're going to get Taylor a cell phone. This is an always on call type of deal. Brian is happy that Taylor is taking this seriously and approves of her humble attitude and openness to learn. You can tell that they really like jibe in their personalities. Um, when I was drinking and I wrote this, I put Taylor is mad charmed by Brian's smile. Um, but yeah, Brian had to. Brian talks about having to twist Alex's arm to get him to take stuff seriously, and then points at Tattletale and says, "Some people think they know everything." Um,
Yeah, we do get to learn a lot about Lisa's power here. She describes it in some detail, but I think we're going to save talking about it until the powers section.
yeah,
Taylor's reaction, though, to this is pretty great because Lisa just says, "Oh, I do know everything. It's my power." And Taylor immediately has a small panic attack internally because, well, trying to do an undercover operation opposite someone who knows everything, it's going to be
yeah.
tricky.
It's also one of my favorite audiobook lines. I do know everything. It's my power. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like the delivery. Like I can't do it, but it's great. Um,
Yeah. Go on.
oh no, I didn't have like a lot more to say about that. Just like Rain is really compelling as a reader.
Okay, yeah. Then we get to learn that that's how Lisa knew that Taylor was at the library. She
Mm-hmm.
wanted to see Taylor react and mess with her a little. That's a very Lisa thing to do. I'm sure that won't cause any trouble in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I just noticed Vic's comment. Uh, and the public seems to not have a good understanding of the hero's powers. Like, I don't think Taylor actually knows Armsmaster's powers, even though she was a fan. Yeah, I agree. I don't think they understand somewhat like the capabilities um that like a hero might have, but they oftentimes like they know what Clock Blocker does because his power is very distinct, but they don't really know what Gallant does, and they only know that he's a fake tinker because of Tattletale. Like,
Yeah,
they'll
I
talk about
think
that later, but anyway.
I suspect there's like a keep geek section of the population that has a better bead on what people do, but the average citizen probably just sees arms master in armor with a halberd is like, ah, yes, armor, halberd, arms master, and doesn't think any deeper than that. They're not trying to like classify powers.
Yeah, Vic just says, wouldn't that be crazy if there was someone we thought was a cape, but they were just they're really just a douchebag hacker? About like Lisa being like
Mm-hmm.
not being a hacker. Yeah. Anyway. Um so yes, we already did that. And then unless you had anything more to say up here.
Nope.
In the words of Brian about Lisa, God damn it. Um,
Yeah, she really likes to mess with people, and well, that's not always the best thing to do when the people you're messing with are uh, potentially dangerous parahumans.
right, yeah.
But she's
Um,
also a
mhm.
big benefit to teams since she gets a lot of insights into people and more importantly into things because she demonstrates that she's got a bunch of PRT protectorate passwords that she's been able to intuit just by looking at like public profiles and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And having that access allows her to get a lot of information, keep tabs on all the local law enforcement essentially. So they are always one step ahead that way.
I think stuff like dropping the thing where she talks about the library in the previous like in the email. I think that kind of thing isn't just like random. It's not just her being mischievous. Like she gets information from the fact that like Taylor still comes after that, or like the next message. So it's like it's like when you're playing Wordle. You get a lot of information from the letters that you know aren't on the board.
Sure. Yeah, Lisa has to have some skills at being a cold reader, where you start with nothing and then you build up by asking leading questions, questions that will get you to new points of information that then you can use to leverage even more. But her power just turbocharges that.
Yeah, and she does like calculated gambits constantly. So, let's see here. Vic
Um,
says an info about how probable it is for Taylor to potentially guess someone's power. Right? Spoilies implied. Taylor to potentially guess. I'm not sure I understand how like the cadence of that sentence. I'm not quite grasping the question. Are you seeing the same thing I am, Greg?
yeah. Sorry, give me a second. Well,
Okay, whatever. Vic
while
said
waiting,
nothing,
I'll
nothing.
offer.
But anyway,
Mhm.
sorry, I was just
Go
trying to
ahead.
like parse it. But moving on. For
I'm
now.
just gonna put in a last note that I'm surprised the protectorate doesn't use two-factor authentication. Would keep minor pests like Lisa out. Uh,
Right.
they,
Yeah.
I guess that then that wouldn't be as exciting though.
It wouldn't fit the store. Yeah, I mean it would make more sense. um. The so Lisa gets an information overload and thinker headaches if she focuses on too much like kind of human level stuff because it's so complicated in terms of like trying to read human emotions, but it also like kind of mimics the personality she already had where before she had her powers, where she's better at like reading sort of situations, and she felt like she had a gap in her knowledge about like specific motivations of people and stuff like that. But yeah, 2 plus 4 times 5 says obviously two-factor authentication doesn't exist in this timeline.
Yeah, possibly. I think it started to get popular in our world, so to speak, around the mid 2000s, late 2000s. But it's quite possible they sort of didn't think about it
Which would be funny
because
because
there's
they have a tinker on the team, but
yeah. But on the other hand, if you're trying to protect against enemy tinkers, maybe it just wouldn't be very effective. There have to be again a lot of people who can just be like, nope, I can just flip that bit to make you think that I did provide whatever the additional key is, or I can decrypt stuff that should be undecryptable or otherwise unpenetrable. So it's just possible that the additional effort of more authentication types, two-factor authentication, biometrics, whatever else like that, it's just not worth it in this context.
yeah. Yeah, interesting.
It's possible, at least.
Yeah. Um and then the I think it's Brian says even though she knows a lot, that doesn't mean Lisa can't be a dumbass sometimes. Um Taylor asks Brian and Alec their powers, but then
Rachel arrives, and she's got a bunch of good boys in tow. And oops, turns out that they're not too happy to see Taylor.
yeah, it's an attack right off the bat. And so if anyone wants to say anything more about the chapter, feel free. I don't really have a lot more thoughts about it. Um, I mean, I think it's a good
Yeah,
chapter.
I mean, I think it's a really good chapter. It really gets us a lot of information on the Undersiders, where they are, the sort of peoples they are, a bit of insight to Lisa's power.
Mm-hmm,
But we
mm-hmm.
get that all in a fairly digestible way. It's not just like an info dump. Even though it is a bit of an info dump, it's a lot of like Lisa talking to Taylor, for example, or Brian talking to Taylor. But
Yeah, yeah.
it really is set amongst enough other stuff that it isn't overwhelming.
I feel like the conversational stuff feels good and it moves at a decent pace for like how far they walk, for like, various things. So it just feels natural, even if like I don't know. Even if they are just telling us a bunch of stuff, it just kind of feels like a character interaction instead.
Yeah, agreed.
Um Anyway, so moving on to 2.8, right from the start, Brian is yelling for Rachel to end her attack on Taylor, to call off the fucking dogs. Um,
Yeah, Taylor takes a moment here though to notice how ugly some of the dogs are. That's some incredible dedication, Taylor. Just always judgy, even while being attacked.
it's not ABC for her, it's ABJ, always be judging.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. Oh, these ugly dogs. God. Yeah. So there's three dogs. There's a Rottweiler that bites Taylor's arm. And it she nearly falls over from like the pain of the initial bite, but then she like does fall over from being pulled to the side by the dog. And then there's a German Shepherd that's snapping at Taylor's face, and a terrier starts clawing at her and trying to find a good place to bite down like a limb or whatever. Uh, but it wants to bite. And then the Rottweiler starts trying to pull Taylor around the room. And she grits her teeth, trying to think of something she can do, but not really finding anything. And then Brian yells at Rachel again. And then when like a tooth or a claw scratches Taylor's ear, she cries out suddenly. And then a few seconds later, the dogs are called off with a whistle. Uh, and then there's a pretty good line here. The one-eyed terrier offered one hostile bark followed by a long growl even as it walked away, as if it still had mean left in it that it had to let out somehow. Uh-huh. Greg,
Yeah,
do you...
look, we know a few terriers, so yeah, they're when they get
Yes.
their hackles up, they don't stop.
Yeah, they get pretty riled up and they're still in fight mode, but yeah, Lisa and Alec help to pick Taylor up off the floor, and she's like shaking and hurting, probably like afraid to some degree, but also feeling more like betrayed, like going from the emotions of the conversation before to being attacked in a place that she was just told she was welcome. And then on the other side of the room, Brian had punched Rachel to the ground. Rachel's dogs are standing at attention, but they're like lined up 10 feet away from her, not right next to her. And then we get another classic drop of this. It is not the first and not the last time we'll hear it. Rachel Lint, Hellhound, bitch. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, though what Brian does here, he punches her right in the nose, knocks her to the ground, and then follows up by saying, "I fucking hate it when you make me do that." I just
Yeah.
very awkward. That's basically sort of the language that abusers use a whole lot, where you knock someone down and then you tell them this is your fault.
Yeah. And
I'm
I
not saying
mean,
that Brian is like a serial abuser or anything like that, but it's just mm, not feeling it.
right. I mean, he does that, and then it also probably like has the opposite of the intended effect because she probably dealt with people like that in the foster system who like use similar sorts of language. Um, and then Vic says,
Y-
but he's kind of right in context. Um, or I hated that line, but he's kind of right in context. And yeah, it's really weird. But the way
Yeah,
Taylor,
Rachel mostly takes it in stride. Like she's just on the ground, but she is still defiant. Like she's licking blood off of her lip. She's like, "Ha, I got my kicks in."
right, right. Um, and Vic also says the way Taylor didn't immediately put up a wall with him. Yeah, probably in context for those characters, I don't think that they like. I think it read to the people in the room as different than it does just completely out of context because three out of the four of them know Rachel, and then like the fourth one. Well, I say three out of the four of them. Out of the five of them, only Taylor doesn't know Rachel, and like the other three don't know how to get along with her, and they don't know how to interact. And it seems from their perspective, maybe like only the violence gets any results. I don't know. Probably Tattletale wouldn't have gone that far, but like, how else would you have ended that situation? I mean, I wouldn't have said what he said, but
Yeah, there's not a good off ramp that doesn't involve violence here, probably. But even so, yeah, that just the line that he says, that language sits poorly with me.
yeah. And then Vic says, "I guess she did get a really mean smile earlier today, even at the time I assumed Rachel was baring her teeth." Yeah. Um. Let's see here. Rachel props herself up, leaning on the wall. Taylor thinks her judgy thoughts, calls Rachel unattractive and butch, and goes through several facial features and thinks about how Rachel's nose was probably broken from getting punched just now and probably has been broken before. Rachel's solidly built without being fat, sort of a thick frame, a lot of muscle. Rachel's, and I mean like that comes mostly from like her lifestyle. She's probably big normally, like she's very tall and she probably can build muscle easily, but she also lives a really hard lifestyle and like rides the dogs and stuff. So
Yeah, what I'm hearing is Taylor's like, "Ah, she's so butch," and what I really hear is Rachel's actually pretty fit. She's keeping pretty good care of herself for someone who has to live almost entirely out of the system.
yeah, I mean it's really she kind of has the I think Taylor would want to have the kind of frame and like power that Rachel has, in all honesty. I think that she would see it as a benefit to have that kind of like strong body to be able to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
Um but when it's Rachel, then get out of here, Rachel, with your green army jacket over your gray hooded sweatshirt. Um, but I thought it was interesting too that she basically dresses as bitch sans mask whenever she's, her civilian persona. She just doesn't switch. There really isn't uh, a gap there for her. So
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it before. Bitch does dress a lot like Taylor, actually. Hmm.
yeah,
I don't really know what to make of that necessarily. I guess just the fact that Taylor judges her so harshly when Taylor herself has a lot of similarities.
yeah, yeah. Um, and then let's see here. So Taylor slowly says, so that she doesn't like stumble over her words, "Why the fuck did you do that?" Um,
Yeah. There's a quote from the book that says, even though she was the one lying on the ground with a bloody nose, she somehow had it in her head that she'd beat me. And yeah, Taylor's looking at Bitch here on the ground, and even though Bitch has been knocked down, uh, she's still happy with the interaction. Bitch is still happy with the interaction, whereas Taylor certainly is not.
right, right. And so the power is buzzing in her mind to the point where she can't focus on what Brian's saying anymore. After a little bit, and then
Yeah. she goes and searches for a reason to stop, like she has so many times in the past with the bullies, where she's been in a bad situation and then calmed herself down, chosen not to take a violent step, and in this moment, she goes looking for a reason to stop and does not find one.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good moment. And it shows another way that like this setting is different from like it's such a different power dynamic to anything she's used to. Like here, she doesn't have to think of like, oh, if I do X, then the like school will get me in trouble or like the bullies will come after me harder. It's like just a completely different dynamic to where it's like, oh, I will actually get a positive outcome from lashing out at Rachel right now. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Let's see here. So acting before she's even really realizing what she's doing on a couple of levels, Taylor like runs forward toward Rachel, sprints forward even, and she's already brought a swarm with her, like to her unconsciously, as like the dogs were starting to attack her, and as her emotions like heightened. Um, so she uses that swarm of bugs to form a screen between where Rachel was and where the dogs were. So there's sort of a physical, unpowered fight that ensues. Let's see here, Vic says Taylor doesn't set her own boundaries. She needs rules, policies, routines to do that. Um, Interesting.
Yeah, I mostly agree. She's really bad at sticking to boundaries that she sets herself, or at the very least, she always pushes back against them. In At some point, in some way, she ends up expanding out beyond where you'd think would be reasonable given the constraints that she nominally follows.
Right. And then Vic says, so when she's in a new situation and doesn't have those already, she just kind of indulges in her id, I guess. Yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of. I agree. Um, and then on her initial kick, she had running momentum behind it, which, I mean, obviously that means that it would be a really powerful kick. Um, and we get a reminder that injuries and physical pain stay with the characters in this setting. Because even during this, when Taylor is hurting Rachel, she impacts the wall because she stops herself with her arms rather than slowing down before she gets there, and she feels that like that sending pain like through the whole bite, and she's gonna have that scar and feel the pain of that scar for quite a while. um, I mean, they talk about it throughout. At least I'm like thinking of a scene in Arc 7 where she specifically looks down at it. But um, yeah, and then sort of moves on, and Taylor thinks I pressed the attack.
Yeah, she really goes and delivers a pretty spectacular beatdown here. Uh, she stomps Rachel right in the ear, like sending her head bouncing off the ground. She delivers kicks to the stomach, groin, and ribs. She just really goes off.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
yeah, and when the dogs start to close in to defend Bitch, that's when Brian finally steps in to stop the situation from escalating even further. He drops the curtain of darkness between them, and he steps up and says, "Enough."
Yeah, so Vic just said, ooh, where's my pick? Then 2 plus 4 times 5, conveniently timed, said, oh, by the way, is there a new picture for this chapter? And then, uh, yeah, it's actually this exact moment of Taylor kicking Rachel that we get,
Yeah,
so.
finally, Taylor's got to kick someone else while they're down.
Yes, and it's not just a metaphor. Um, let's see here. So I think we were like here, or did you say that?
I said that, yeah.
Okay, sorry, I was reading the chat. So the we get sort of an interesting power reveal here because we theoretically already know what his power is, but we finally see Gru like the darkness and get more sort of details, and we'll start to understand how like the little things and nuances about powers are way more important than they might seem. Um, we've got this quote from the book: "A shadow fell over my vision, jet black. A shadow fell over my vision, like a jet black curtain sweeping in front of me, blocking my view of half of the room and the dogs. It dissolved into wisps of black smoke a second later. I was startled to see Brian standing right in front of me, between the dogs, or between me and the dogs. So he totally like he sends it up. You have like no senses of anything coming from that side, including like sound and stuff, and then he can just dismiss it suddenly, and it can be very shocking. And we'll talk.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And come to think of it, this is a move we see Brian pulling this moment where he covers his movement with darkness, so he seems to just disappear from some place and appear in a different place. We'll see Taylor emulate this in the future. Super cool.
Yeah, yeah. You'll see like in many ways Taylor, not only with Brian but with everyone she can, she picks up all these little things and incorporates other people's moves into like stuff she can do with her power. She's always expanding her tool set. Taylor plagiarizes so much stuff for real, says Vic. Yeah. Um and then let's see here. So Brian stepping in and breaking up the conflict is like a reflection of the previous encounter with Gladly and the girls in the hallway when Gladly walks away instead of helping her. Brian directly intervenes and like stops the conflict. I just think that's like a big difference, and the scenes feel similar to me, and they're in the same arc, so I gotta think that there's like an intentional connection there.
Yeah, definitely. I hadn't really considered how those two situations are so similar, but they really are. Where you have Taylor being attacked, and then a character has a chance to intervene, and one time they don't, and one time they do. So we really get to see how much more positive impact Brian has in this moment than the teachers in Taylor's life.
Yeah, for sure. We're down here.
Yes. Bitch calls her dogs to heel. After which, after Taylor sees the dogs stand down, then she stands down afterwards and calls her swarm off.
And then Brian continues to stand up for Taylor. He says, or it's no more fighting, he said, his voice calmer. I'm directing that at you, Rachel. You deserve whatever Taylor gave you. And
Yeah, and
yeah.
this leads to Taylor storming out. Though she feels like she's been attacked, she's been betrayed on some level, and she decides to leave. She says, "You said she wasn't cool with me joining. You never said she was pissed off enough to try and kill me."
Yeah, and then Rachel says how she just told them to hurt her, and if she wanted them to kill her, they would have killed her. And then Taylor's already like in a very emotionally flustered state, and she sort of freaks out more at the idea that they have a command to hurt. She she's like,
Even
"Great,
though,
you
yeah,
have a person on your team who gives them a command to hurt." But like later, she'll obviously see that utility, and she won't understand like other people's hesitance to deal with Rachel, despite this like exact example of her having a near identical reaction to like other characters later in the book.
yeah, I mean, it's obviously very useful in a world where you expect some violence to happen to have a command to debilitate an opponent. Not maim them, but stop them from being an effective fighting force. It's a good thing to have. Just Taylor doesn't see it in this moment because she's so riled up.
Yeah, and I mean like Vic has a near identical reaction to what you just said in the comments. So yeah, I think we all kind of agree there.
That's true. Yeah, she doesn't. She has a problem with the command to hurt, but not a problem with the command to kill.
Yeah. um, and then what are we? Oh yeah, she said another failed recruitment to them as she storms out.
Yeah, Brian tries to stop her. He uses her power. He uses his power rather to try to stop her from bolting, but Taylor can feel her way with bugs and isn't tremendously stopped by having being in this area of sensory deprivation, not being able to see or hear. Turns out she can work around that.
Right, right. It's only like a short moment of conflict, but we're able to see when they are working against each other for a couple paragraphs that like she has such an effective way to deal with being in the darkness. So without having to outright state it, they display in a subtle way that they'll work really well together, and how it's kind of because of how hard her, well, it's not like a hard counter, but her power is like a pretty good counter to his. Um, and then Zing, Taylor's one-liners are always lacking in that it factor. Yeah, I mean sometimes I think some of them are pretty great. Like when she calls Rune Sabrina the teenage Nazi, I think that's a good line. But
Yeah, I don't think Taylor's the best one-liner in the series. She does have some okay moments, but she is not going to live up to the greats, really.
yeah, I mean I also like, so the protag of Ward, her inner monologue, like some of the stuff she thinks, just I think it's a
Oh,
laugh riot. She's so funny to me. Like she's so like semi I don't know, not self-aware of how not funny she is, but I don't, it's a great balance in terms of like uh unfunny funny.
hmm
Anyway, um let's see here. We are here, I think. The power that Brian displays is like a sensory deprivation, and we'll talk about it more in the powers section a little bit, but I was just going to pull this interesting quote about it, which is, the sound echoed as if from a distant place and had a hollowness to it that made me think of someone shouting from the bottom of a deep well. And that's like her own voice. So,
yeah, it's appropriately spooky.
yeah. Um and then we've got the texture of the darkness was inconsistent, making it hard to identify the full scope of my movements. Like she doesn't even, I don't remember what the sense is called, but it's that sense that humans have of where their body is in relation to itself. I think that is
Perception or something like that.
um something like that.
Um,
But that sense itself I think is being messed with. And I think that's a
yeah,
cool,
proprioception. There we go.
gotcha, yeah. Um Proprioception. I'll have to look that up. I can't even, like, my brain's not imagining how it spells, so um let's see here. Brian apologizes for using his power on Taylor, so that they can sort of calm down the situation. They're in the bottom floor of the entryway, and he's he stopped her before she's opened the door to the outside, and they're talking.
Yeah, he tries to convince her to stay. He even goes so far as telling her that if it was up to him, he'd kick Bitch out and keep Taylor. Bitch is quite a lot to deal with. We just see her here where she's violent, aggressive, a handful, whereas Taylor really jived with Brian from the get go.
Yeah, and like you can tell that I think that it's a genuine, uh like what he's saying is really how he feels, because it's been so clear from the start in the like prose that they're really able to be on the same level, and he is the kind of teammate, like she's like like an ideal teammate from his perspective, someone who's a hard worker, who thinks stuff through, who's like level-headed
Sometimes.
but willing to get violent. Like I don't know, it's like he can tell that she's like a really good balance to be like an effective cape, whereas he sees like Rachel as like a total loose cannon. From his perspective, she's like impossible to understand or deal with. Um, like we'll see going forward as well that like he just has no idea what's going to get results with her, like that he wants, and does all sorts of like like the stuff we saw earlier, where it's just like this is the only way he knows how to deal with this situation, but it's having like a distinctly negative impact, and it's not doing them any favors.
Yeah, he's not a very good bitch handler.
Right, right, yeah. So she almost says that she's a hero, but she stops herself and says cape instead when she's saying that she became a cape to escape all the like bullying and power dynamics of school.
Yeah, and despite the fact that Taylor feels like storming away, Brian ends up making some good points like, hey, you're bleeding, you're hurt, your clothes are all ripped up, you left your bag upstairs, so all of that money is upstairs, your costume is upstairs. Taylor just sort of left and didn't think about any of this.
Yeah, I mean it was more of like a fleeing than like a normal walkout or thought through exit. So
Mm-hmm. But
yeah.
this leads to him being able to convince her to actually come back upstairs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um. So it ends with Brian smiled and opened the door for me. I'll take what I can get, and then oh yeah, because Taylor had said that she was only going back to spite Rachel. Um.
Mm-hmm.
Great motivations. So, do we want to say anything more about that chapter or move on to the themes?
I was just gonna mention that it sort of needs to get a bit more action here. We get to see Taylor in a less deadly situation where she has to use her powers and uh, go out on people, and we get to see that she doesn't necessarily need to use her powers to be at least a somewhat effective combatant. Like she manages to deliver a beatdown without having to bite Rachel with a bunch of Black Widows.
Right, and it shows that she's willing to get in, like, while she couldn't have fought long in an effective way in close quarters combat, she's willing to get into, like, a normal enemy and fight them just with her body.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas, like, that's not true of a lot of parahumans, depending on what powers they have. Um,
I
but
mean, to be fair, even most parahumans, your body is just like your normal body,
yeah,
unless you're a
but so is
brute or a
hers.
breaker or yeah. But that's what I'm saying is that like a lot of them, it's entirely reasonable that they wouldn't want to, and it would be reasonable for Taylor as well. Her power is very effective at range. Just uh, when it comes down to it, when the chips are down, she is totally fine. Yeah, going out with her fleshy human body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there's another it's a pretty good chapter. I think the previous one was more compelling to me, and the next one also is. This one has the fight of the arc, and this is the, I would say, like, probably, because kind of every arc has a fight, and this is like the smallest scale fight out of any arc, which I think is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like that, this is the peak conflict on screen right now. Um, but
Well, yeah, but I do appreciate there sometimes being some conflicts that again aren't like existentially
oh yeah, no
terrifying
no,
for Taylor.
I'm
Where
not saying that they should all be life and death. Like I like when she fights the heroes, and like the idea is not that like I could get killed, but it's like just oh shit, if like clock blocker tags me, I'm going to jail.
Mhm.
So um never play tag or freeze tag with clock blocker. Um, this is what I propose. But I think we can move on to the themes. Um,
yeah,
mm-hmm,
and I'll pick up this first theme because
mm-hmm.
I mentioned it already at the very start, where Taylor has a tendency to leap headfirst into dangerous situations without considering exactly what she's getting herself into. We saw this first with going out as, in a costume and ending up fighting Lung, which is quite a doozy of a first encounter. Then she joins the Undersides without considering like all of the ramifications of what that would cost her, revealing her identity to them, using her name, and then lastly, we see in this most recent chapter, of course, when she flees from the Undersider's loft without considering that she's left everything important behind and she's got ripped clothes and this bleeding will stand out everywhere.
I've got explanations for all of these, Greg. Don't worry. The lung fight, she was trying to fight someone tough early to get lots of EXP, and it just went a little wrong.
Oh,
But then somebody else came in and got the assist kill, so she got the assist points, so tons of EXP. And then on that next one, you said joining the Undersiders. Well, she needed to join a good early guild to get some good loot. Uh, and then
oh yeah, of course. I wasn't thinking of this as an RPG enough. That's true.
Yeah, and then fighting Rachel, she didn't want to spend too many mana points, so she had to use her regular attacks.
Mm.
Uh, sorry, I just thought of that while you were talking about the different situations. I was like, this actually does sound like a really annoying min maxer. 2 + 4 × 5 had said in the chat. Clock Blocker is my number one favorite cape name in Worm. Um, It's a pretty good one, but I think there are a few others that I really like. And if you include the ward names, oh, it gets out of hand.
No, I personally agree with 2 + 4 × 5. Clock Blocker is a S tier name for an S
All
tier cape.
right. Yeah. Vic says good loot equals big metal stick. Yeah. Yeah, that's what you gotta get is big metal stick, and then later knife. Um,
Mm.
uh, anyway, so the next theme is the ever-present theme at the beginning of the story of bullying. Taylor's continued growing feelings toward Taylor's feelings toward Brian continue to grow as he stands up for her. It's clear that sees him as like the kind of moderating force that she doesn't have in her normal life, like someone who can like assist her in trials and tribulations, someone who's willing to actually stand up for her, etc., etc. So, I think that's really important. It's like he's not a bystander like all the other people have been. Um, and then like with Rachel attacking her, that's of course a form of Rachel trying to form a pecking order through the form of violence and bullying. And while it might be more visceral than the exact stuff she deals with at school in terms of like it's a heightened violence, um, and it fits the establishing hierarchy theme, but the heightened violence is still stopped from escalating in a way that doesn't happen at the school because Brian diffuses the situation. He's not only stopping it then, but he's stopping future instances.
Yeah, definitely true. I think an important thing to note here, though, is that Taylor is finally breaking out a bit of her tier in that hierarchy. Where at school, she's always the one who's being beaten on, and here she finally finds the resolve and doesn't find a reason to stop herself from kicking back. And the important part of that, of course, being that that's growth in her character, and also she might find it hard to step back into that tier if she goes back to school and has to face down the bullies again.
Yes, she won't hold back. She'll use the full force of the swarm on them. No, I don't think that, but um let's see here. But I mean, I agree with you. It will be hard for her to deal with the like going from not taking shit from anyone as a cape to trying to pretend to be the same person she always was at school is going to be like harder and harder.
Mhm.
Yeah. Boop boop boop. Yeah, the conflict escalation averted. Probably gonna full skip on the glossary, and I think into the characters section. Got Brian first. Despite them saying they don't have a leader, it definitely seems like he's the one who makes most of the decisions, kind of the adult in the room a lot of the time as well.
Yeah, he's really the one who steps up to diffuse conflict, like you say. Alec and Lisa basically don't say anything once fists and dogs start flying. But Brian really steps up and shows off that he has the chops to take charge of a difficult situation.
Indeed, indeed. Um, for Lisa, she's the only other Undersider who kind of has authority. She messes with people just cause, even when maybe she shouldn't. And then other times she messes with people to stir things up to get info.
Yeah, she definitely. It feels like her and Brian have a bit of conflict over that. Like, whereas Lisa does all these mischievous things, and Brian sort of has to deal with the aftermath of it. Um, she's a bit of a lancer to his leader.
Yeah. And then 2 plus 4 times 5 says, once fists and dogs are flying, the bugs are also flying. Yes.
It's true. So many things are flying.
Um, so for Alec, even in a 4-person conversation, he manages to keep himself as a background character. Um, and then you had put here this part.
Yeah. When they're heading up into the loft, and Taylor expresses her awe at the sweet digs, he says, "Dork, what are you jealous for?" And it's really just him welcoming Taylor in his own odd way.
Indeed, indeed. Um, so I don't think there's too much to say about Alec because he didn't actually do too much, but I thought it was funny when he would roll his eyes and so forth. Um,
Yeah, I did want to mention for a
mhm.
guy who calls people dorks a whole bunch, what we've seen so far is that he dresses in Ren Fair attire, while out in costume, and he does a bunch of art, and he probably plays video games. I think Alec, you might find that you are the dork.
Definitely. Vic Vic says justice for Alec before anything bad is even said about Alec. Um, anyway, so we shall give Alec justice, Vic. Don't worry. Um,
Even if he is a dork.
yeah. What a dork. Um, so Rachel, she bursts onto the scene, instant fight. She's aggressive and violent. She does back down quickly when Brian hits her, because I mean, like, um, uh, it's like a sudden attack, but it's kind of like she's testing Taylor in a way. Um, she like could have escalated things with Taylor and didn't. So maybe it's like she didn't fight more later because Taylor did like actually fight back and like make it not worth it to battle. Just kind of hard to say exactly, but whatever the exact thought process was, she decided not to attack Taylor a second time.
Yeah, there could be a degree of respect there that she didn't really want Taylor on the team because it's going to split the profits more, is what Brian said, but also potentially because she doesn't think necessarily this weird bug is worth it. And Taylor does show that she can hold her own in this moment, at least.
Right, that she's got something to add in a fight. Because from Rachel discounts a lot of things, and it's just like we're already strong. Like throughout, not just this like section of the book, but like throughout most of the book. So
Mm.
yeah, she just kind of. I mean, she gets smarter about it, but for a while, she's like a little like pretty cocky, I guess is how I would put it, because she did manage to like survive completely on her own for so long. I think that kind of led to part of it, but
Yeah, I kind of wonder how long she's been. I don't recall how long she's been in Brockton Bay facing off against these heroes, because the Brockton Bay PRT are uh, they're not chump change. They're actually pretty good.
so she came to Brockton Bay to join, like, as part of joining the Undersiders, so about a year. I think it's 11 months before Taylor joins the team, but the before that she had been in Maine, they said, and I just assumed based on the way they say it that Maine is of course not where uh, Brockton Bay is, and I don't think any of us think it's in Maine.
No, yeah.
And then 2 + 4 × 5 said, I guess you could say Taylor joining the team bugs Rachel. Okay,
Ha
sorry, I'll stop.
ha!
Yes, definitely. Um,
Well done, sir.
I think we are at the point where we can go to this section here, the powers, knowledge, and world building.
Absolutely.
So even with only 2 new powers, we're already establishing a wide range of possibilities. And it's just like in a lot of settings there aren't that many different powers. Like and when there are, like, all the electricity powers are kind of the same power. They're just like guy shoots electricity, or like all the strength powers are just the same power. Whereas in this, most of the times, like, the like hyper specifics of how the super strength works operate, like, changes how the character operates and all these different things.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, like, it is possible that you can sort of obscure your power if you have a sort of traditional flying brick sort of thing where you fly, or you're super strong, or you're super fast.
Mm-hmm.
But in Worm, there's definitely always nuances to powers. No matter what, it's never just that simple.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's like always a lot going on with them, like tons of sort of restrictions to the powers that make it like hard for the user, but also interesting for the story. So,
Mm-hmm.
um and this chapter leads us to consider, well, these 2 chapters lead us to consider how hard it must be to initially form a team, because even like the meetup to potentially join a team can be risky. Meeting like multiple people who have powers when you're not like sure you trust them yet, because unless your power is amazing, you're not going to be able to operate solo. Because you'll end up fighting whole teams even if you're by yourself.
Yeah, definitely there's risks both ways. And with the teams, especially because it involves putting your safety in other people's hands, I can see why a lot of capes are initially hesitant because you don't know these people, and these people are villains, and they're probably not great people, or it means you have to expose your identity to them, or expose whatever you pick up. If you do a big heist, they could just run away with a bunch of the rewards if you're not careful.
Yeah,
There's risks every step of the way.
but I mean, I think it's pretty compelling to have a team once you get your shit wrecked a couple times. So
Yeah, having backup is pretty valuable.
yeah. 2 + 4 × 5 says about the different way powers operate. I love how the various speedsters in Worm all have different drawbacks and weaknesses. Yeah, I mean, like, just the thing that gives them their speed is so important to how they actually fundamentally interact with the world. Like it just feels like there's an actual material world behind this, whereas a lot of superheroes, like the Flash, for instance. Like, I know that there's theoretically some mechanics behind how he works within the fiction, but they don't feel real to me. They don't feel concrete. They don't establish them in a way that jumps out at me. And like, I watched that Flash live action television show with my brother for a while, and like just didn't quite, like, even when it was fun, like it was just kind of random what the powers were or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, it is important definitely when you're writing a world to have consistent rules for how things work so that your readers can have expectations of what's going to happen, right? So you can have a decent understanding of if the character does this, I can expect that they're going to get these sort of results. And if you lose that, then you just tend to lose all attachment as an audience to uh, how the powers work. It just becomes magic.
Right, exactly. And I think something that 2 + 4 × 5 says here, that especially because The Flash has had however many writers over the years, I think that's very true. Wildbow has a singular idea of how he wants the powers and the system to work, and he just like fits it all in, so he doesn't have to like have another person working on a different section who doesn't like kind of get what his vision is. And so like
Yeah,
obviously that's not really possible with a large scale project like a live action television show, but like with a book, like that's one of the benefits of being a book is that text only you can really just have it all there. Like it's all from you.
sometimes it is definitely possible to have multi-author projects where you can have a
Mm-hmm.
consistent vision. I know I've seen big projects where they've talked about, yeah, essentially they keep like a wiki or a design bible where
Right, right.
they come to a consensus as multiple authors about exactly how the world works and exactly how these things work, how these characters are, you know, where they live, what they think, what they do. And that can allow you to bring multiple authors down to one page. But it's much easier if it's just you, if you're just Wildbow writing a book to keep it all in sync because you're ultimately the source of authority.
Right. And I mean, the other thing is, as soon as you break off the page and into like a visual medium, for example, like anything with acting as well for like live action, you're just like, and not that this is a bad thing per se, but like you're opening things up to such a wide range of like it's very hard to get everyone on exactly the same page, so you kind of end up with the this combined vision and like obviously end up with like crazy masterpieces, but you also get little moments of like inconsistency and whatever, and so it's just like so much harder to manage because of the complexity level. It's the
Yeah,
chemistry to the physics.
actors can definitely bring their own dimensions to the characters that can change how they're perceived pretty radically. I think that a lot of people might think of like um, Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's fairly different in the series than he is in the books, and a lot of that just comes down to the way that he was acted. Um, Very charismatically, but also it changed the way that people saw him, and thus how the showrunners ended up treating him in the end.
Right, for sure. I mean, that's one where like it kind of got out over its skis in terms of like uh that Peter Dinklage is such a compelling like person to watch on screen. Like he can play Bolivar Trask, and I'm like, wow, I want to watch a movie about Bolivar goddamn Trask. And then I did, and I liked it. But like he can play like anyone and make them awesome. So that kind of changes the factors around in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like in the book, you don't have to worry. Like Tyrion is just who you write him to be. So yeah. Anyway, moving on from
Mm-hmm.
that tangent. Tattletale. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I have pulled a little quote in here because it really just encapsulates her power very neatly. Where she says, my power fills in the gaps in my knowledge. I generally need some info to start from, but I can use details my power feeds to me to figure out more stuff, and it all sort of compounds itself, giving me a steady flow of info. Yeah, and she has superpowered intuition, really allowing her to leap from just scraps of information, from nearly nothing to tremendous amounts of information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So she gets the benefits of things like being a super hacker without even having to do hacking or leave traces, because she can, get the info that she would have had to leave behind a digital signature of some kind to get without actually doing that. Um, and she can also read people, but she mentions it's better with more concrete data.
Yeah, even though she says she's better with concrete data, she was able to read Taylor fairly well on their first meeting, get some information out of her without her saying a word. So I'm not saying that she's necessarily downplaying that part of her power, but she definitely is able to pull out a lot of stuff, regardless.
Indeed, indeed. Um, I thought you were actually going to say what you wrote here. I thought it was funny.
Oh, I just said Bug may be in trouble.
Yeah. um, yeah, so she can really go from almost nothing to some pretty incredible information. Uh, Passwords from public information, guessing locations from direct message she receives, and getting more information like compounds, so she could potentially end up with some real juicy goss, as Greg said here. Um,
Yeah. In the end, Lisa says, it's not really that amazing. But honestly, Lisa, Tattletale, you have a fabulous power. Uh, really top tier. Being able to pull as much information is so valuable in so many ways. Like, it won't protect you if Lung is beating down your door. Possibly. Asterisk. You never know. Um, but it opens so many possibilities up for Lisa and opens up so many possibilities for the team that it's just astonishing.
yeah, and there's so many moments where the information that she has is the entire difference between the Undersiders winning and losing a fight, because like, oh, this really specific piece of info about somebody's power and like a minor downside it has, like we can just walk a van through that, you know, like the loophole in the
Mm-hmm.
power or whatever. So, and Vic says TT is so OP. Agreed. Yeah. Her power
Yes,
is like
definitely.
ridiculously good. But what I just thought of is, and I think we talked about this like out loud, but never wrote it down, is that kind of all of the Undersiders, like, well, I guess, okay, I'm formulating this as I'm saying it almost. So there are capes like Lung or like Bitch who present their strength through direct action, but there are a lot of people who specifically like downplay their powers. And I would put on that list like Alec, Lisa, Taylor, like all these people who have these like downplayed ideas of their power, or they like downplay it publicly. And then you've got Brian, who never like comments on the strength or weakness of his power. He doesn't even really like think about how it affects other people, like mentions not thinking about how it affects. So it's like maybe I'm just like sort of I think I'm just pontificating aloud, but it's like interesting to me the different ways they interact with the public perception of their power.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about this yesterday, I mentioned that I think a lot of capes end up looking at all the high tier capes they see in media. They look at, the news and they see Alexandria, they see Legend, they see crazy over the top capes, they see
Mm-hmm.
Eidolon, and they think, wow, my power isn't anything compared to those. Those guys wipe the board with me. And sure, but you're comparing yourself to the cream of the crop here, as opposed to the people who you'll actually have to interact with in Brockton Bay or the surrounding area. So the real watermark here isn't so much Legend, but Miss Militia, who is also pretty great, but is a big step down. And in that context, the Undersider's powers are pretty freaking great. Some of them
Yeah,
are
yeah.
more than great. Some of them are top tier.
And then Vic says it could just be a self-esteem thing. Brian doesn't feel the need to justify his strength or weakness of his power. Alec is kind of an outlier, but Tattletale and Taylor have huge image issues. Yeah, I mean that's you're right. They really do, and maybe Brian maybe Brian is just more confident and doesn't need to think about it really. That is interesting because I mean, like, also Rachel is coming from a very defensive place, and someone like Lung, who despite I would say even when we see from in his head, he feels very like confident. Like it's never a doubt in my mind that he's sure of things. I think there is kind of an underlying pathology of fear to need to be the like strongest, most dominant like one all the time.
Yeah, it's the same sort of mindset that leads people to carrying large weapons around in public when they don't really need it.
Right, right. Like someone who like I don't know has a handgun for defense even though they don't have any enemies, kind of
I was
thing.
thinking more of just like carrying an assault rifle strapped to their back.
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. Where it's like completely over the top.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
more like the lung, where you have the people who are more subdued, even if you need a handgun for self defense. Displaying it openly is not necessarily a great way to achieve that. And there's a lot of parahumans in this world who, either because they're more humble or because they have image issues or whatever else, they keep that hidden more. Or they think it's not as worthwhile as the guy who's carrying around the assault rifle, I guess.
Right. And not to say like the traumas of the different capes are necessarily, well, first of all, they are at different levels, but not to say that the worse or better is like necessarily the determining factor here, but I feel like the relationship each cape has to their power can be different. Like Lisa's power, you know, knowing her backstory but without spoiling it, uh I think it's probably, even though it's always on, a bit grating all the time because it does bring her back to her worst moment. Whereas, like, I don't know, it just seems like some powers don't affect the people using them as much. Um, like I feel like
Yeah.
Alec isn't negatively affected. Like he feels good when he uses his power, even though it may be kind of, you know, whatever. He's just into it.
Sure.
So
Speaking of people who aren't affected by their own power,
Gru. Yeah. A shadow fell over my vision, like a jet black curtain sweeping in front of me, blocking my view of half the room and the dogs. The same quote I read earlier, but still. Um,
yeah,
mhm.
Gru has this really cool power. It's not so much darkness generation, but being able to actually block out a lot of the senses in a particular area. So he's able to block out sight basically entirely, sound somewhat less so, and then some of the other senses even less so. Like Taylor mentions she has problems like feeling where her limbs are, so that's a sense. But her sense of touch seems to be working perfectly well, more or less. And of course, because she has this alternate sense where she can feel where her bugs are, she's able to navigate through his darkness. But
Right, and
for a normal person, that would be
yeah,
just completely disorienting.
yeah, and we learn later that sense of smell works inside the darkness. It doesn't stop smells from carrying, but what it does is, as a minor perk of his power, Gru himself gives off no scent.
Hmm. Yeah.
So there's, I mean, I know that that's not in the story yet, but fun little fact. Um, let's see here. Bu- 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 Yeah, I like this. It slithered over my skin, oily with a weird consistency to it. Um,
Yeah, it has that really good description. You could imagine like a visual depiction of this actually like moving in that sort of oily way where it's really just sort of flowing very visibly.
yeah. I think like in my head, I feel like I have a very good idea of how Gru's power would look in like a visual medium. So
Mhm.
like even if I have a very different vision, the fact that my brain's able to generate like a very powerful image, I think is good
Yeah,
regardless.
his personal aesthetic works really well with that, with the helmet that has the skull in it, because you can have it like dissipate around him, and you just get that skull like emerge from the darkness.
Right, and
I don't know, super cool.
it's so like thought through how he has the vents on the helmet so that it like vents just a little bit of it, but that it doesn't fully obscure and come out of the helmet like zone. So like
Hmm.
it's just like all these little thought through details are so cool. But um, let's see here. So Gru is, oh, and if we didn't mention it above, Tattletale is a thinker, of course. She thinks with her thinky brain. Um, and Gru is a shaker and stranger. Not so much the darkness generation, but being able to block out most senses in a limited area, including like radio signals and so forth. Um, it doesn't seem like it works on most alternate senses, like the bug positioning sensors that like that our girl bug has with when she's feeling out for her swarm. Uh, Allows her to, you know, maintain her composure, but normal people would be like falling all over themselves.
Yeah,
Um, mhm.
do you want to pause for a second and define for anyone who doesn't know what a shaker or a stranger is?
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Oh, and I missed Vic's comment for a while. Rachel is really disconnected from herself too, and she's into it. Yeah, she likes her power because it gives her a connection, I think, to the dogs, whereas she has no, like, from her own perspective, no connections to other humans. So, But yeah, a
Mhm.
shaker is a person who changes the battlefield. So like if you put up force field walls that make it so that somebody has to run through a mirrored funhouse to reach your side of the battlefield because you had a trauma in a hall of mirrors and you watched Crouching Tiger, or not that movie. What is it? Enter the Dragon. You watched Enter the Dragon too many times and got scared, so now you have force field mirrors. Then that's a shaker power. Sorry, I gotta go. Bye. Oh, bye, Vic. Bye bye. Sorry we took too long. I will read your answer from the Discord.
Yep.
Um,
See you later, Vic.
bye bye. Um, so yeah, the Shakers change the battlefield, oftentimes like giving their side a safe zone or giving the enemies an area they can't go into or just anything like that. Um,
Yeah, your classic sort of battlefield control.
mhm, mhm. And then your Stranger is anything that kind of adds like subtlety or like subterfuge. Like I would say that like for the Stranger portion of this, an aspect that's kind of like a um, maybe an underrated quality is that he can throw darkness down onto like the spots he's walking, so there's no echoes of his footsteps. So he can like sneak really, really well.
Mhm.
And it's like not a big deal to him. He doesn't have to like move slowly. He throws the darkness down and he can like run. So
Yeah, I think the most important part of the stranger classification is just being able to um muddle or completely misdirect people's perceptions so that you can move without necessarily having people see what you're doing.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, Especially in this context of like the Shaker Stranger, like having your people move around the battlefield as the fog of war. Um, and like this is the section you had like mostly written that I thought was good.
Yeah, that Brian really is a fog of war generator. He can set up areas on the battlefield where whatever opposition cannot reasonably see what's going on, but his team can still coordinate at least somewhat. With Taylor on the team, even more so. Taylor and Lisa both have alternate perceptions that allow them to pierce the veil somewhat, and then Brian himself can also act as a factor since he is not affected by his darkness to get his people in line and then emerge when it's most beneficial for them to do so.
Well, I was also going to mention so the reason it matters that smell works inside the darkness is because the dogs move around the darkness with smell sense mostly, and
Mhm.
the then Alec has an alternate sense as well. He can sense like humanoid nervous systems, like just
Yeah,
at a
yeah.
distance. So he's able to tell where people are and like their relative body position and stuff because he can feel where their muscles are for the most part.
Hmm.
So um what's the next bit? Gru mentions that he barely even notices the darkness and it's got the really good synergies and yeah, he has fine control over where the darkness is. That's another thing that's very variable between different powers is like how fine tuned a control that character has. Like I would say that Taylor has incredibly fine tuned control, and like when she gets like her like if she gets hit over the head or if she gets like no sleep, then like she'll have slightly less control, but it's still like pretty good, like even compared to other masters that we see. Um,
Yeah, like even using Bitch as an example, she doesn't have direct control over her dogs, uh, but she takes the effort to train them so that she can have control that way.
right, and her minor like sort of I don't think it's like big spoilers to be like most capes have background abilities that kind of assist their powers. Her like minor abilities kind of have to do with like being able to train the dogs better by having like an innate understanding of their psychology and
Mhm.
stuff. So she's able to just like get on their level and really make it work. Whereas like a normal human, like you're not a superhero with that power. So like yeah, um, and then but as far as the fine control goes, we see plenty of people throughout the book who have like very little control over their power, some none at all. So
Yep, you can have your Bambinas and whatever else.
yeah. But I think moving on, we go to bitch. We got a description of her power and saw her dogs all pumped up, but we didn't really get to see anything more of this chapter. Other than noting that her dogs are very well trained, because she didn't use her power on them whatsoever this time. So, uh, yeah, I consider, despite the minor power use of Taylor using the bugs to keep the dogs away, I pretty much consider this an unpowered fight.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, Taylor uses her bugs in a relatively minor way. Brian uses power in a relatively minor way. It's mostly just fisticuffs.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, there will be later instances where Taylor, in certain ways, is just fighting as a normal human, but she is using the bugs to sense the movement of the person, like has one on like a wrist or like ankle to just keep like without needing to look everywhere, perfect sense of where their body is. And she's not
Mhm.
doing anything like that here. She's just fighting.
Yeah, Taylor will get better at this, but
Yeah.
uh, in this moment, you're right. She's just going at it. No particular thought put into it.
And then I wanted to jump onto the channel here for the audience participation. We have the answer from 2 plus 4 times 5, which was, and the question was, basically, if you were in this setting and you became parahuman and you had powers, would you be like a hero or a villain? Would you be like, what kind of team would you be on? Would you be a solo hero? Would you be work on a corporate team? Would you be like in a heist style villain gang, or like just where would you be at generally? So he says, if I got powers, I'd probably be a tinker. Personally, I'd prefer to be a heroic tinker, but with my luck, I'd end up with a specialization that's more suited toward villainy, like hypnosis slash mind control devices, along the lines of Screenslaver from Incredibles 2. If I could mind control people with a screen, then I'd want to be somewhere in between a solo villain and a mercenary for hire, but preferably not for anyone that's legitimately evil. In my spare time between jobs, I'd avoid doing anything too outrageous, instead, sticking to low profile stunts with short term consequences, such as hypnotizing a person who to make a new PHO forum account and post a meaningless encrypted message, then have them forget that they did that. If I got caught, then hopefully I'd be allowed to join the Protectorate, but I don't think they'd overlook my past semi villainous uses of my power, even if I was being objectively harmless. And then with the subnote, I thought about this a lot in the shower. uh,
Yeah, that's a pretty cool description there. Tinkers, although especially, seem to in this world have a tough time going solo, just because you need more effort to build up all your gadgets and then stop people from stealing your gadgets or breaking them. Having resources helps more, but it is definitely still possible to go as a solo tinker, especially if you had a power like you described. Mind control uh, opens a lot of doors and closes a lot more of them.
mm-hmm. And then Vic answered, I would be a hero on the Protectorate team because I'm a normie and a follower. And then in parens, celebrity cop. So yeah, that's what you get. And you know, I've thought about this a lot. It's a hard question to answer because it's like so situational and so based on like what power you end up with and like all these factors. Um, I think it's kind of easier go with the flow to be a hero in a lot of ways. Um, I mean, you do have to deal with the bureaucracy and stuff, but it's just your life is much more stable. So it kind of depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, I actually wrote up an answer to this that
Oh
says
yeah.
those things. I'm just going to read it if you don't mind.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
I said, I suspect where I'd end up would be highly dependent on Trigger. If it was me right now and I got a power and no strings attached, the Protectorate or the Guild makes the most sense for providing a support network without having to handle all the nonsense of a corporate team. Less lethal than being on a villain team, and way less lethal than being a solo anything. But as I am right now, I lead a fairly peaceful life. The kind of shakeup that would give me a trigger would probably involve knocking down important parts of who I am or how I live. So it's going to shift how I see the world. I can't discard the possibility of ending up as a solo villain, even though I know that's a short and unpleasant road for any but the most powerful and ruthless.
I think a career path that makes sense is like what Brian did, where he was like low level crime dude, then like mercenary dude, then he got recruited to be on a team. Like I think
Sure.
that's gotta be the way that a lot of like starting villain capes go, because like how do you even find a team to join most of the time?
Yeah, how do you get a foot in the door?
Yeah. Cuz like inherently these teams, unless you know where like the villain bar is, these teams are kind of like hard to access on purpose because they're, trying to hide from the law.
Mm.
Yeah. And being a solo hero would be fucking terrible because like, you're fighting with people who like a lot of them are going all out. And you're oftentimes probably fighting multiple capes, and so yeah, unless your power is like ridiculously good, it's just such a bad idea. And even so, just you don't cover many bases. I guess there are some capes with really variable powers like Eidolon, but not that many.
Yeah, but you'll note that even Eidolon is not just part of any team, he's part of the biggest team in the world, pretty much. Even the
Yeah,
Protectorate.
yeah, no, for sure, for sure. I mean, I just think being solo is mostly a bad idea.
Sure.
But anyway, so we kind of forgot to write the full audience participation question. We have one for new readers only, which is what do you think Regent's power is? Because we ain't we ain't seen it yet. Although I think we've talked
Yeah,
around it a few
we've talked
times.
around it a bit. It's true. We've seen a bit of him. We've seen what he looks like in costume, and we've got a bit of his personality, but we haven't gotten any power details really yet in the story.
Yeah. Well, we'll learn about it next chapter. So if you have an answer to this, you'll want to write it before you read the next chapter.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I'm curious what people think he might be up to.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and I am going to write a an audience participation question that I put into the Discord channel for this, and since I'm already bringing up the Discord, I will just jump right into the links. So we've got in the YouTube description, we should have the links to Wildbow's Patreon, like the actual author of Worm, where you can support him on a monthly basis. Um, it is patreon.com/wildbow. The full text of the book is available at parahumans.wordpress.com. The full fan-made audiobook can be found at audioworm.rain-online.org. And then there's also the Discord link on the YouTube channel. And then we've got the stream next week at the same time as always, 1 p.m. Mountain and noon Pacific. And that'll be Saturday the 19th. We will only be reading chapter 2.9. And then the following week, we'll read 2.x, and Victoria will be on that episode because it will also be the end of arc episode. So, um,
Very cool.
cool, cool, cool. Is there anything else you want to say before we finish up the stream?
Just thank you to any of the viewers. Thanks a lot for coming and listening to us talk about this for a couple hours.
For sure, for sure. Thank you to the people who listen, and we'll Talk to you next week. Bye.